In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Christ is in our midst. Today's gospel reading is indicative of the fact that we are at the footstep of beginning Great Lent. And you might say, well, we just said Happy New Year, but now we are talking about Lent, and the answer is yes. Lent is coming very shortly, and this gospel reading today of Zaccheus reminds us that we are coming to that point. It's always right before the Triodion period, or the period where the mood in the church shifts in the hymnology and the writings of the church to prepare us for Lent. But we hear this reading of Zaccheus, and the question could be, well, why? What does it have to do with Lent, and why do we have it so in advance of Lent? And really, what's the meaning of this story today? Well, Zaccheus, as you know, he is said in the Gospel of Luke, he was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. In other words, he was hated by everybody. People would look at the tax collectors and realize that they would squeeze people for money, even people who were poor, and if you couldn't pay it, then the response to that was you'd go to jail, very similar to, I guess, what the IRS would be today, but now we have all these defenses and these lawyers. But what they would do is they would come in and they would just seize your property and send you to jail until you could pay your taxes. Well, how can you pay your taxes if you're in jail? And the answer to that is you can't. And that's why we hear the gospel reading about the forgiveness that is offered to one person, and then the other person goes and says, you owe me this money, give me this money, and I'll put you in jail until you can pay it. That was kind of the way things functioned. If you couldn't pay, you just went to jail. It wasn't any kind of negotiation. It wasn't you'd file Chapter 7 or Chapter 13 or go to a loan consolidation place or take a line of credit on your home. It was, you were in trouble. There was no place to go. So Zaccheus, I'm sure, from even his own comments, was one of those people who put the squeeze on people for finances, because he even says, if I defrauded anyone of anything, I'll restore it 4 times over. Now, we have to look at why this gospel reading is important today. Zaccheus did something prior to coming to climb that tree, and that the action that he did was he changed his life. He decided that he was going to abandon the way of the old and that he was going to follow Christ. He knew that Christ was coming, but he did some prep work before. And when Christ says, I'm going to stay at your house today, I'm going to come visit you, hurry up, get out of the tree and take me to your home, Zaccheus already had all his ducks in order. He had everything in line. He already knew what he was going to tell Christ. I've already changed my life. And Christ knew that too. And Christ tells him, salvation has come to your house today. In other words, a twofold salvation. Number one, he changed his way of life. And number two, Christ is in his home. The salvation of all, the light of the world, the Son of God, now says, I'm coming to your home. But why did he choose to come to his home? Well, because Zaccheus made the prep work. Zaccheus went and he decided to change his life, and then he decides that I can't see him because I'm short. Now, I don't know what that means as far as, physical stature. Maybe he was extremely short. I don't know. But he couldn't see Christ coming because of the crowd. So he just decides, I'm going to climb up in this tree. And he's up in the tree just waiting to get a glimpse of Christ. He's not yelling at him. He's not saying, hey, up here. But Christ, knowing everything, knowing the hearts of all the people, just stops. I mean, you visualize this in the gospel. So Christ is walking down the street, it's lined with people, and he stops and looks up in a tree. I mean, just think of that awareness of Christ, knowing everything that's going on. Even in the crowd, when people are touching him, the woman who touches him, who has that flow of blood, touches him, and he says, who touched me? And the disciples are like, everybody's touching you. Everybody's all around. How can you not know that everybody's touching you? And he says, no, somebody touched me because power went forth from me. In other words, I just healed somebody and I don't know who it was. Where is she? I'm sure he knew who it was, but he says that, and then the woman finally comes forward as her confession of saying, I believe, and I touched you in expectation of the healing. But we see Zaccheus in this tree, and Christ already knows that he's changed, that he's ready to receive Christ, not only in his heart, but also in his home. And he stops, just think of that. He stops, he looks up and says, by name, never met him before, because there's no encounter before that. He says, Zaccheus. I mean, you just see Zaccheus, he's like he didn't let go of the tree. Zaccheus, come down. I'm coming to your home. And the guy comes down a tree, takes him into his home, and immediately tells him, upon entering his home, I changed. I'm going to give half of my goods to the poor. If I defrauded anyone of anything, I'll restore it fourfold. But what's the other thing that happens too? Christ is there, and he sees Zaccheus. He turns and says, come down. And what happens? What happens everywhere to this day? Everyone, and it says in the gospel, they all murmured because he went in to be the guest of a man who was a sinner and a tax collector. In other words, they all gossiped. Nothing new there 2,000 years ago, nothing new today. The people gossip about what they see, about what has been given to them. Oh, look at that person. They were healed of that miracle. Oh, they're such bad people. Why did God do that for them and he won't do that for so-and-so? These are the things that the demons kind of put in our ears to twist us and to malign our image of God that we have within us. And he calls him down, and they all look at him and say, look at that. He's supposed to be the Savior. He's supposed to be pure. He's supposed to be Christ, the Messiah. And he's going into that house for what? Why would he go into that man's house? But Christ, knowing the heart of everyone, even us today, he knows exactly where you're at. He knows exactly where you're not at. He goes in and is really the house blessing of Zaccheus. It becomes the cleansing, this new life for Zaccheus. And what happens is Zaccheus later, he becomes one of the first bishops of Caesarea. He becomes ordained. He follows Christ. He leaves, just like many of the followers of Christ left their profession, and he follows Christ and becomes a servant of Christ. But the important thing here that we have to understand is he did some prep work behind the scenes, and then the question is, how bad did he want it? That's the question we all have to ask ourselves. You know, many times people will talk about material items and say, I really want that bad. I want it. So, I mean, you see even from being young children, especially boys, will have pictures of cars in their room, posters. They say, when I grow up, I want to get that car. And they want it. Now, not everybody, you know, drives a Veyron or a Ferrari or those types of things, but they, from a young age, those become some of the biggest icons in the room of children. Or I want to be a professional football player or baseball or hockey or whatever, and it becomes, these images are what we are going to from a small age. How bad did Zaccheus want it? He wanted it bad. He wanted this new life. He wanted the stamp of approval. He wanted to glimpse with his own eyes on Christ after deciding he was going to make the change. And God responded to him. Christ saw him, stops, acknowledges him, and calls him out and says, you, by your change, have invited me in. He doesn't say, can I stay at your house today? He says, I'm coming to your house today. He didn't say, do you want me to come to your house today? He says, I'm coming to your house today. Why did Christ do that? Because Zaccheus had already invited him into his home by inviting Christ into his life. He had already opened his heart up, and it was just a natural progression that Christ's presence was going to be in his home because Christ's presence was already in his heart. So what does this say to us? Like I said at the beginning, for our Lenten journey, is we have to do some of the prep work. We have to embrace God in our heart, and we will see through the Lenten period, through the Anastasi, through the services and the cycle and the sacraments of the church, that Christ will be present and physically, gracefully present with us and transform us and to guide us out of our ways of old and to be the presence of God in our life that leads us to better things in our life. Not more of things, but better things. Better prayer, better living, better relationships, better everything in our life that is good in the eyes of God. So the question you have to ask yourself is, how bad do you want it? How bad do you want the presence of Christ? How prepared are you to have Christ walk through the front door of your home? Would he notice, walking into your home, would he notice images of himself, of his holy ones? Or would they be in drawers? Would our icons be put away? And would there be other images that are more pronounced? Other statues of mythical figures and the lack of icons in our homes? What is our home open for? Is our home open for the grace of God to come in? Is our heart open for the grace of God to come in? So ask yourselves, how bad do I want this? How bad do I want to become close to God? Because a relationship with God is not something that begins at our death. It doesn't begin by saying, well, when I die, God will grab me and he'll save me and he'll be merciful to me. And as long as I say I love God, he'll grab me, he'll take me. But what is our relationship with God now, today? And will it be growing because we want it to grow, or will it become stagnant? So reach inside and make those changes so that when you come to the Lenten period, you are already set. The groundwork is laid, and now you are waiting the grace of God to come and to lift you up. And as you want so many things in life, we should be longing, as the fathers of the church say, longing, thirsting with great hunger, the relationship, the loving relationship with God. And it's very easy to do. We just have to do a little work. And sometimes we have to think outside the box. And as Zaccheus did, he climbed the tree, thinking outside the box. He didn't say, well, it's too hard. I'm not going to be able to see him. I'm short. There's a lot of crowd. It's busy. There's going to be a lot of traffic or whatever the things are. He doesn't. He finds a new method. So find that method for yourself. Find what works for you. And sometimes it's even in our desperation. You think, as Zaccheus was saying, there's no other option here except for me to climb a tree. Now think, this man who was feared, probably respected, climbs a tree. He's just climbing a tree like a little kid to see Christ. So return to the beginning and return to the roots of why you're here and what you want out of your life. And we should all be wanting that great relationship with God. Amen.